No one saw Hallie after that day. No one met him again at the usual coffee shop corner, where he'd order a black iced coffee, no sugar, and sit quietly, gazing at the street as if hearing a song only he could hear. No one saw him walking the sidewalk early Sunday mornings anymore, left leg tilting slightly, hands in the pockets of his faded old jacket, as if still keeping the cadence of a march no one commanded. He vanished, the way war survivors often do. No goodbyes, no footprints left behind. Then, a week later, in the early morning as the sky just began to glow, the shop received a package. No one delivered it. No return address. Just a small paper box placed neatly at the front door, as if it had waited there all night, silently hoping to be found. On the lid, in a trembling but firm hand, a simple line: "To the gun shop west of town." The shop manager opened it. His hand slowed as he saw inside an old cap, a ranger cap, faded, threads frayed around the brim, its bill softened by years. Lifting the cap, beneath was a piece of paper, folded neatly in thirds, lying still like a final whisper. He unfolded it, reading aloud no more than a sentence. "I don't need to carry the rifle, just the memory." No name, no signature. But everyone knew whose it was. The cap was placed back on the counter, right beside the M14 he'd once asked about. The manager wiped the dust from the glass case, gently adjusting the rifle's position. Then he took the old photo, the one of 8 soldiers in the jungle years ago, and set it in a mahogany frame, standing it upright next to the cap. In front of it all, he affixed a small brass plaque, plain, unadorned, engraved with a single line: "He walked alone, but never lonely." Soon after, others began to come. No schedule, no one prompted. Just one by one, a veteran who'd driven army trucks, a woman who'd served as a battlefield medic, even young people who'd never seen combat but understood the weight of silence. They came, leaving something at the door: a silver-plated coin, a white flower, a unit patch, even an old dog tag with a misspelled name. Each item a wordless thank you. One afternoon, as the sun sank slowly toward the horizon, a group of high school students visited the shop on a local history trip. At first, they darted around the displays, giggling at the sight of antique weapons. But then their teacher, a woman in her 40s, hair in a high bun, black-framed glasses, stopped before the photo. She said nothing for a few seconds, just stood still. Then she called the group over. A boy stepped up, his eyes leaving his phone for the first time all morning. The teacher pointed to the photo and the glass case, her voice blending into the surrounding quiet. "This is a man who walked when the world turned its back, and 12 others returned to remind us. Some people never leave." The kids didn't fully understand, but they fell silent. And in that moment, That silence held more value than any history lesson ever printed on paper. Robert S. Halley left no medals, no will. But he left something time could never take: the invisible presence of dignity. No one needed to know how many shots he fired, how many lives he saved, or what he sacrificed. They only needed to know when he was pushed out, 12 men stepped in, not because he asked, but because they owed him a debt no money could repay. They didn't let him stand alone, not when he'd done what was right his whole life, never asking to be seen. If this story stirred something in you, a quiet warmth, an awakening, or just a pause amid the rush, share it. Subscribe to the channel to catch more stories about people who don't shout, but always make us listen. Comment below. Let us know where you're watching this from and what time it is. And if you know someone like Halley, someone who lived, who sacrificed, who stayed silent, write their name. Because sometimes just saying their name is enough to ensure they're never forgotten. In a medieval castle, the dim light filters through stone windows. You gaze at your reflection in a polished silver basin. Mirrors haven't quite caught on yet, and anxiously inspect your skin. If your complexion isn't as pale as someone who's just escaped from a tomb, you're in serious trouble. In the 14th century, alabaster skin was the height of fashion, not the glowing rosy white flaunted by beauty influencers in Miami on Instagram. No, you needed to look as though you had never seen the sun, like a character stepping out of a gently horrifying tale. Have you ever thought that your skin tone could be a social statement? Why was pale skin so crucial? In those days, society was clearly divided into two groups: the nobility who lived in castles and the peasants who bent their backs in the fields. A sun-tanned complexion shouted, "I work the land. I toil under the sun to plow or herd sheep." If someone looked at you and thought, "Oh, you must be quite adept with a scythe," that was a social disaster. Conversely, a ghostly white complexion was a golden ticket to flaunting your upper-class status. It was as if you were saying, "I have servants, I have shelter, and I have never once laid hands on a cow." Pale skin wasn't just attractive. It was the ultimate symbol of wealth. Would you want your skin to tell that story? But here's the catch. Not everyone was born with skin as white as a specter. Nature doesn't always cooperate, especially when you live in Europe where summer sun still finds its way through the clouds. So medieval people got inventive and somewhat gruesome to achieve the look. Can you guess their secret weapon? White powder made from lead. Yes, lead, the metal we now avoid like a germ-infested public restroom. Noble women, and sometimes noblemen, would apply this powder to their faces as if it were medieval foundation. The result was a smooth, luminous pallor, as though your skin were coated in a soft, ethereal mist. Would you dare smear that on your face to look noble? Of course, the price of this beauty was no bargain. Lead is a toxin, slowly seeping into your body, causing fatigue, headaches, and sometimes an early demise. Yet for medieval folk, it was a price worth paying to showcase status. If your skin began to flake or your hair fell out from lead poisoning, you could simply shrug and think, well, at least I look distinguished. Ironically, there was no FDA to warn them about side effects. Do you think you'd be brave enough to try this method? Or would you rather save your money for modern skincare products? If lead powder wasn't enough to make your skin crawl, there were other methods. Some used vinegar to lighten their skin. Imagine dipping a cloth into vinegar, then wiping your entire face as if you were scrubbing the kitchen table. It not only brightened the complexion, but made you smell like a ready-made salad. Not everyone could tolerate the stench of vinegar, but for a peasant aiming to pass for a lord or lady, it was a cost-effective choice. Would you try vinegar face wiping to see how posh you could become? Probably not. For the wealthiest, they upgraded to the ultimate luxury, pulverized pearl powder. Yes, pearls, the kind you see strung in a necklace at Tiffany's today, ground into a fine dust, mixed with water, and applied to the face. It gave you a luminous sheen, as though you'd stepped out of a holy painting suffused with moonlight. But the price tag was enough to buy a small parcel of land. Just think, crushing a pearl to dust only to smear it on your face. That was the level of extravagance for the medieval elite. Would you splurge on pearls for your beauty regimen? Interestingly, men did not opt out of this beauty contest. Court gentlemen, keen to display that they never fought under the sun or labored in the fields, sometimes also coated themselves in lead powder or wiped their faces with vinegar. They wanted pale complexions to broadcast. I'm important. I discuss poetry or politics all day. Male or female, the goal was the same: to appear as though you had never broken a sweat. Yet the cost of this beauty always carried risks: peeling skin, weakened health, none of which anyone truly desired. Do you think they were crazy to make such trade-offs? As you lie there, pondering those medieval souls slathering lead on their faces or smelling of vinegar to look refined, doesn't history feel wonderfully bizarre? Pale skin wasn't just an aesthetic. It was their way of telling a tale about wealth, status, and distinction. Fortunately, you don't need to smear lead or crush pearls to prove anything. Just relax, take a deep breath, and let this story lull you into sleep. You've just learned that in the Middle Ages, a ghostly white complexion was your golden ticket to high society, even if you had to trade your health for toxic lead or pungent vinegar. But now, shift your gaze higher. Yes, to your forehead. In the 14th century, the forehead was no mere patch of skin. It was the stage of elegance, the billboard of intellect, and the way you shouted to the world, "I'm far too refined to wield a hoe." Would you dare to widen your brow into a wind-swept field? That was every noblewoman's dream back then. Imagine yourself standing in a castle, poised to transform your forehead into a masterpiece. Would you dare to go that far? In medieval times, a high forehead symbolized intelligence and nobility. They believed that a broad, mirror-smooth brow was proof you were born to ponder poetry, not to milk cows. If your brow was low, or worse, hidden by stray strands of hair, you'd be viewed as though you'd just tumbled out of a pigsty. A lofty forehead proclaimed that you spent your days lounging by castle windows, daydreaming of the clouds, rather than bent double in the fields. It was the Middle Ages version of posting a luxury travel shot on Instagram. Everyone wanted it, but not everyone could claim it. Do you think your own brow is refined enough to compete? But here's the catch. Not everyone is born with a widescreen forehead worthy of a cinema. Natural hairlines can be stubborn, sitting right above your eyebrows as if determined to ruin your noble dreams. So what did medieval women do? They turned beauty into a brutal battlefield. They didn't stop at plucking eyebrows, that comes later. They went even bolder. They pushed their hairlines skyward. You heard that right. They shaved their hairlines, bit by bit, so their foreheads stretched on like boundless fields. This was no gentle salon trim. This was a facial renovation project, demanding patience and a high pain threshold. Would you dare pick up a razor to expand the real estate of your forehead? To achieve that dreamy brow, they employed every tool at hand. Tweezers were the basic weapon, yanking out every stubborn hair. But if you craved speed, hot cloths were popular. Imagine pressing a steaming cloth against your forehead, waiting for strands to soften, then yanking them out as though cleaning a stubborn rug. Does it hurt? Absolutely. But beauty demands sacrifice, right? And if you were a truly daring noblewoman, you might summon even more terrifying mixtures, like slaked lime, a caustic chemical potent enough to scorch your skin. They'd mix lime with water, paint it along the hairline, and wait for it to eat away the hair. Sounds more like a witch's laboratory recipe than a beauty tip, don't you think? What then is the result of all these efforts? A smooth, expansive forehead, as though you were born to wear a crown, or at least a gold-embroidered headscarf. Your brow becomes the focal point of your face, like a blank canvas in a gallery, ready for all to admire. In medieval portraits, you'll see noble women with foreheads so broad you could write an entire poem upon them. It isn't mere fashion. It's your way of declaring, I'm far too lofty to know what a shovel feels like. Do you think you'd have the patience to pluck every stray hair for that look? Or would you rather let your bangs fall kindly across your forehead? The funny thing is, to show off your perfect brow, you must coordinate with fashion. Tight-fitting veils, or the pointed hennin hat you'll hear about next, are designed to draw all eyes upward, toward that flawless expanse. Hair is hidden or entirely shaved away so as not to overshadow the masterpiece on your face. The result is a look of ethereal grace, almost otherworldly, as if you've stepped out of a sacred painting. But the price is steep. Pain, time, and occasionally a bit of raw scalp. Would you dare shave your hairline to widen your brow? You'll probably say, "Thanks, but I'll stick with bangs to cover it." You've just discovered that in the Middle Ages, a forehead as wide as a wind-swept field was the pinnacle of nobility, achieved by shaving your hairline and enduring caustic lime. Now, shift your gaze downward. Yes, to your eyebrows. If you meticulously fill them in each morning, or proudly sport TikTok-worthy bushiness, brace yourself. Medieval fashion would have you hurl your brow pencil out the window. In the 14th century, eyebrows were not a seductive highlight. They were seen as interlopers, like two ink blots marring a perfect painting. Would you dare wave goodbye to your brows to chase a trend 6 centuries old? I bet you'd clutch your face and scream, "No way!" In medieval times, a sleek, unobstructed face was everything. And to attain that look, eyebrows had to vanish. No mercy, no remorse. It was believed that brows formed an obstacle, ruining the glass-smooth canvas of your forehead, the real estate you'd just turned into a masterpiece. A mirror-sleek brow, free of unruly hairs, was a sign of refinement, of angelic proximity. Have you ever admired medieval saints' portraits? Women's faces looked as though they'd just stepped down from heaven, with large eyes, and not a single brow hair to disturb the serenity. This wasn't sloppy artistry. It was fashion's command. Brows were deemed superfluous, like an outdated ornament you'd shove under the bed. Do you think you're brave enough to abandon your brows? But eyebrows, as you know, aren't inclined to retreat voluntarily. They stubbornly regrow like weeds after rain, defying your noble aspirations. So what did medieval women do? They declared war on brows with every weapon available. The most common method was plucking, hair by hair, with tweezers. Imagine sitting before a polished silver tray, teeth clenched against the pane, plucking each brow hair as if clearing a patch of weeds. Every tug met with the mantra, "Beauty demands sacrifice." But if you lacked patience, shaving was the quick fix. A sharp blade would sweep across, and bam, your brows were gone, leaving a face as smooth as if photoshopped for the age. Would you dare pick up a razor to chase this trend? You'd probably opt for a modern waxing salon to spare yourself the shakes. If plucking and shaving aren't gruesome enough, there were even more lavish methods. Some noble women used a vinegar concoction to depilate their brows. They'd soak cloth in vinegar, press it onto their brows, and wait for the hair to weaken. Sounds simple, but you'd smell like pickles all day. Not quite the noble aroma you'd expect. And if you were truly daring, or perhaps a bit unhinged, you could use arsenic. Yes, arsenic, the poison you now only encounter in Agatha Christie novels. They'd mix arsenic with water, paint it on their brows, and pray it only killed the hair, not their faces. The result? Brows vanished, but you might pay the price with peeling skin or an early trip to the barber surgeon, or physician. Do you think they were crazy to use poison as a beauty aid? The result of this battle is a visage of ethereal grace, almost supernatural. No eyebrows. Your forehead appears broader. Your eyes look larger. And your entire face seems sculpted from an angelic dream. In medieval art, those browless noblewomen appear as if stepping out of a holy painting, skin flawless, features unmarred. It wasn't merely fashion, it was your way of declaring, "I'm far too noble to bear bushy brows like a shepherd." But the price was steep. Plucking stung. Shaving risked uneven patches, and arsenic was a high-stakes gamble with your face. Would you dare use arsenic to depilate your brows, just to resemble a noble woman of that era? Dear audience, take a moment to relax, or grab a glass of water, and then settle in for the rest of the story. The twists are yet to come. And please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see viewers joining us from all corners of the globe. Comment number 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we can keep bringing you more great stories. Now, let your eyes drift away from that ice rink smooth forehead and those brows that vanished without a goodbye. Let's continue our beauty journey through the Middle Ages, this time focusing on the next feature of your face, your cheeks. Yes, the cheeks, the romantic realm of blushing pink, where a hint of color can transform you from a pallid noblewoman into the muse of a springtime hymn. But hold on. Before you reach for that 12-shade peachy cheek palette and swirl your brush like an abstract painter, remember, the Middle Ages was no era for attention seekers. In that world, pink was forbidden to shout for attention. A whisper of rosy hue on the cheeks, as if you just received a discreet confession by the well, was acceptable. But just a touch more, enough for onlookers to suspect you'd jogged 3 laps around the abbey, and, oh dear, you were instantly branded a frivolous nymph. And if you dared appear before the nuns with cheeks burned by the sun, good luck, you'd risk being lumped in with the witches seeking atonement. Thus, medieval ladies mastered the art of applying as if not applying. Much like you saying, "I'm fine," when you're boiling mad. They concealed every beauty effort behind an expression of effortless nonchalance. Their secret weapons? Beetroot juice, mulberry extract, and yes, toxic red lead. You heard that right. When nature fell short, they turned to chemistry. Lacking any formal toxicology degree, they still knew how to concoct a blend just pink enough, yet potent enough to shorten lifespans. But Don't assume cheek application was a rushed affair. There was no 2 swipes and blend. No. In that era, each dab was akin to a sacred ritual. Right hand gripping the cloth, left hand shielding the mirror, silently praying for just enough flush to look lively, but not so much as to make the priest swoon as you passed by. It was the art of restraint, of appearing as if you'd strolled through the meadow at dusk, rather than as if you'd stumbled into an open paint can. Imagine yourself as a noblewoman in the year 1357. You sit by a stone window as colored light filters through stained glass. Before you on a table rests a small bowl of mulberry juice, freshly crushed with a wooden pestle. You dip a fingertip, then gently touch your cheek, as though testing the temperature of a bath. Just a hint, nothing more. Done. You tilt your head, narrow your eyes at the warped bronze mirror, and wonder, do I look as if I've just shared a smile with a gallant knight? If someone, perhaps a servant or a meddlesome aunt, accidentally compliments you today as looking a bit different, you must have your response ready like a charm. Oh, it must be the breeze. Neither admitting nor denying, only a mysterious smile remains, leaving behind the same tantalizing doubt as when someone claims they've just had one slice of cake. Such subtlety is your shield against gossip. Because whereas today rosy cheeks signal vitality, in the 14th century, they could be your one-way ticket to the confessional. People believed that women who overdid their makeup were displaying licentiousness, as though you were attempting to seduce someone other than your own husband. And if you were the wife of a devout man, your blush should be even more faint, closer to saintly marble than mortal flesh. Thus, instead of highlighter palettes, women of that era relied on candlelight and patience. Cheek color had to make onlookers question, did she truly blush, or is that merely the firelight's reflection? If someone gazed at you with too much fascination, you simply tilt your head, offer a gentle smile, and change the subject. Like a beauty spy, you must always guard the secret of your radiance's origin. And among all those shades, from beetroot, mulberry to toxic red lead, the most coveted hue was not the pigment itself, but the illusion of just touched by heaven vitality without appearing overly alive. A blush bestowed by God, not concocted in a pot. A beauty that makes hearts sigh in wonder, yet offers no proof for any accusation. Do you trust yourself to be subtle enough to pass medieval beauty inspection? Or would one too vigorous swipe land you on the frivolity watch list? It's hard to imagine that today, one brush stroke and a miracle sponge can blend everything to perfection. But back then, one tiny misstep, and you lost all your dignity. Not to mention, you might be applying color with a scrap of cloth soaked in poisonous lead, all while hoping your skin doesn't peel before Sunday vespers. And so, each time you sit before your mirror, fingertip on cheek, whispering, beauty demands sacrifice. remember? Medieval women said the same. Only they worried about being summoned to preach from the pulpit, while you fret over your foundation oxidizing. The 14th century required you to be beautiful to the point that no one could tell you were trying. Golden, long, wavy hair. This was not merely a dream. It was the very definition of divine beauty in the Middle Ages. If angels had earthly counterparts, they would surely glide about in linen gowns, their golden tresses sweeping to their waists. No crown required, no stage lights necessary. The mere caress of sunlight through their hair was enough to turn heads in every cathedral. Alas, not everyone was born with God-kissed locks. Yet medieval women refused to accept their natural shade. They devised every possible method to achieve that purest gold, a hue believed to crystallize virtue, to embody celestial beauty. And when we say every possible method, we mean it quite literally. If you imagined a gentle, fragrant hair treatment, you're in the wrong century. Their recipes relied on 3 main ingredients: determination, substances you might eat or might wish you hadn't, and a touch of defiance against fate. First came saffron, a costly spice, but for any noblewoman intent on golden hair, no expense was too great. Ground saffron mixed with water, applied like a marinade, then left to bake in the sun. After hours, you couldn't tell whether your hair had lightened or simply smelled like lunch you forgot to wash off. A benevolent deity might grant you radiant locks. A less merciful one might leave your hair straw dry, exuding a rather peculiar aroma. If saffron was beyond your purse's reach, honey was the next best choice. Easy to acquire, sweet-smelling, able to deliver a glossy sheen. But one stray breeze could make you the prime target for every bee in the vicinity. There's nothing quite so seductive as meditating in your courtyard, begging the sun to cooperate, while swatting bees from your ears. And if you were particularly brave or exceptionally reckless, you wouldn't overlook another traditional secret. Urine. That's right, urine. No gentler term exists. Some medieval women believed that urine, especially harvested from vigorous young donors, held miraculous powers to lighten hair. The question isn't why, but rather who first had that idea, and why did the rest follow suit? After coating your hair with the mixture, the next step was sunbathing. Not just a few minutes by the window, but sprawling for hours under the scorching sun, your head reeking like a backyard barbecue. Women of that era would sit motionless on stone benches, kerchief draped over shoulders, squinting as they waited for the divine rays to work their magic. Supposedly, their hair would turn the color of ripe wheat, but in reality, sometimes it simply ended up a stubborn, sunburned mess. However, whether your hair truly turned gold mattered only until your wedding day. Because once you donned that bridal veil, all your proud efforts would vanish beneath a discreet layer of linen. That's right. Once a woman was married, loose hair was strictly forbidden. No more dancing in the breeze. Your hair had to be wrapped up like an unopened gift, tucked beneath a solemn veil. No more allure, no more freedom, only propriety, according to the standard of domestic virtue and inner piety. The headdress wasn't merely an accessory, it was an invisible wall between the unclaimed maiden and the virtuous wife. Your hair was no longer a personal statement. It became a shared asset of your marriage. To be kept secret, like an email password, everyone knew you had it, but no one got a glimpse. Thus, single young women seized every moment of their golden years. Hair let loose, twisted gently by hand, cascading over shoulders like a stream of youth. Each tress whispered the silent invitation. Here I am, unbound, unattached, and this hair is the proof. But the moment the marriage vow was spoken, that hair disappeared behind white cloth. In truth, no one could tell if your locks were still golden, because from then on, only your husband and God would know. So, would you try sunbathing with a honey and proprietary liquid concoction? Or would you look at your natural hair in the mirror, smile, and quietly thank your lucky stars you weren't born in an era where washing your hair required bravery? You'd surely choose the latter, because today you can dye your hair with a single click and wash it clean in one evening. No saffron, no buzzing bees, and absolutely no pale yellow bottles stored in the courtyard. The Middle Ages may look romantic in paintings, but in reality, sometimes beauty demanded sitting through midday heat, honey-drenched hair, sticky skin, all just to hear someone mutter, "Your hair looks fine." If you think a Yankees baseball cap is the height of fashion, then please step back in time to the 15th century, where another hat held every gaze, the hennin. Yes, hennin, a name that sounds like a French soup, but in reality it was a towering, sharply pointed headdress, as though designed to pierce the ceiling. This hat was not only the fashion statement of medieval noblewomen. It was a silent declaration. I am married, I am luxurious, and I have a neck strong enough to bear the weight of the era. The hennin was not for the faint of heart or the weak of neck. They could reach nearly 3 feet tall, almost the height of a 4-year-old. Imagine stepping into a hall, your head topped by a colossal cone, silk cascading from its pinnacle down to your shoulders, a gentle breeze lifting the fabric in soft waves. Every eye in the room would turn to you, not because you were saying anything interesting, but because they were trying to fathom how you passed through the door without snapping your neck. The purpose of this hat wasn't merely to look beautiful, it was a promotional tool for the forehead. For as you recall, a broad brow was then regarded as the hallmark of nobility and the seat of intelligence. A well-made hennin was one that directed the gaze upward, skipping the eyes, bypassing the nose, and stopping at the vast expanse where brows once dwelled. A very forthright visual architecture. But the hennin was not the only pinnacle of headwear. Noble women of that era boasted a head accessory collection as diverse as a modern influencer's shoe closet. If the hennin was the choice for grand banquets, hairnets offered a daily chic style, both practical and eye-catching. These nets were often woven of gold or silver threads, so intricately tied that each knot might lead onlookers to assume you were of royal blood. However, if you truly wished to shine, in the literal sense, then a veil studded with tiny bells was indispensable. Yes, bells. Small though they were, each movement produced a tinkling sound, like wind stirring a wheat field. Some noble women even adorned their veils with gemstones, ensuring each turn of the head became a performance of light and sound. You didn't need to utter a single word. Your hat would speak for you. Of course, wearing these hats required not only skill, but also courage. You couldn't don a hennin on a windy day unless you were prepared to soar like a kite. Each step had to be calculated as if you were strutting down a catwalk. How many degrees would you tilt your head? Where would your eyes look? How would you hold the silk drape? It was a precise choreography, and you couldn't miss a beat without risking becoming the amusement of the market children. Furthermore, remember that these hats weren't for unclaimed women. A lavish hennin proclaimed, "I am married, and I've made a good match." The hat was more than mere headgear. It was a symbol of status, of power, and, naturally, a touch of refined showmanship. If you wore a simple hat, you might be deemed virtuous. But if your hennin soared skyward, studded with diamonds, jingling like church bells, you needed no introduction. Everyone would know exactly who you were. And don't forget, sitting down. A seemingly simple act, yet with half a meter of hat atop your head, every chair became an adversary. Bow too low? The hennin slipped. Tilt back too far? It banged the beam overhead. Records even show women leaning at a 30-degree angle just to keep their hennin from toppling into their soup. Sounds troublesome? Perhaps. But for women of that era, this was the art of living. In a world where female power was constrained, each hat was a silent act of defiance, a way to say, "I may not speak loudly, but my hat speaks for me." You might chuckle imagining someone entering Starbucks with a 3-foot hennin, silk tail billowing, bells jingling at every "your caramel latte is ready." Yet, ultimately, is that so different from us wearing bucket hats pulled low or massive headphones, as if we're astronauts awaiting liftoff? Every era has its own style, and hats always lead, both literally and figuratively. So if tomorrow you wake up feeling a tad bored with your familiar beanie, imagine stepping out of an ancient castle, hennin atop your head, gown flowing, each step echoing like a melody down a bustling street. You needn't say, "I'm special." Your hat says it all. And you know what? You might just find your baseball cap a bit modest thereafter. By now, you've learned to shave your hairline for wisdom, pluck your brows for refinement, blush your cheeks like a gentle breeze, wear your hair golden as an angel, and perch a hat tall as a satellite antenna. But don't assume you're ready to step onto a 14th century street just yet, for in the Middle Ages, beauty was not merely about appearance. It was a moral statement. Yes, beauty then was no simple looks cute or photogenic by candlelight. It was considered a gift from God, a heavenly sign that you, yes, you, possessed a pure soul and noble character. Every graceful contour of your face, each lustrous strand of hair, every smooth patch of skin was viewed as proof that God smiled upon you from behind those cloud-strewn heavens. But, and here's the important but, if you appeared overly conscious of that gift, if you spent more time before the mirror than at the altar, every gaze would begin to tilt in judgment. For in the mindset of the day, there existed a razor-thin, almost invisible line between saintly beauty and worldly arrogance. Just a slight adjustment of your veil for symmetry could cross you into the realm of frivolity. And once branded frivolous, you were but one step away from whispered rumors. Perhaps she's practicing witchcraft. Witchcraft, in this context, wasn't about waving a wand and conjuring donuts. It was the kind involving full moon nights, cauldrons simmering, incantations in ancient tongues, the sort that branded a woman a witch simply for looking too alluring. Indeed, records note that women who applied makeup too meticulously, became too eye-catching, or made men turn their heads, were prime candidates for wizarding inquiries, a sort of beauty check where the prize was a trial. Thus, medieval women lived in a silent drama, a daily performance balancing beauty with humility. You had to look good enough for society's approval, but never so dazzling that the Lord's wife frowned and thought, "She's going too far." If you were a village maiden, you might dab beetroot juice for rosy cheeks, let your hair flow if unmarried, or fasten a hand-embroidered hairpin from your aunt. But should you appear at the Lord's banquet with cheeks as red as fine wine and a lace-trimmed veil, well, good luck. You'd have unwittingly entered an unasked contest. Who's more beautiful than the lady of the manor? And remember gently, the lady of the manor must always win. In that era, the ideal woman was beautiful yet discreet. Discreet meant you were lovely, but never appeared aware of your own beauty. Every compliment had to be met with a vague smile and a formulaic reply such as, "Oh, I hadn't noticed. It must be the fine weather." In other words, you had to play the role of the innocent angel so convincingly that no one could tell if your beauty was genuine or merely fortuitous. This is why medieval women practiced one art nearly as much as they did dabbing rouge or conditioning their hair with honey, the art of deflecting praise. A compliment like, "You look radiant today," demanded a graceful bow, followed by a non-committal remark. "Oh, I've just returned from chapel." And if someone praised your hair's fragrance, "Ah, I baked bread this morning," perhaps that scent lingered. Such humility did more than secure your place in society. It served as an ethical shield. For if you never claimed your own beauty, no one could accuse you of flaunting it on purpose. This also explains why, though everyone knew who the most striking woman in the Shire was, no one dared say it aloud. Beauty was seen by all, yet treated like a shared secret, public, but never acknowledged. It was like the dessert at the end of a banquet. Everyone saw it, everyone wanted it, but no one was permitted to take the first bite. So the question remains, do you have the subtlety to navigate that labyrinth of morality? Can you apply just enough makeup to look fresh, but not so much as to offend the lady next to you? Can you let your hair flow in the afternoon sun, without the other noble women suspecting you're vying for their son's attention? That was the true test of a medieval woman's mettle, knowing how to be beautiful without courting envy. For in those days, if you were too beautiful, you didn't just draw glances. You drew scrutiny. You drew judgment. And if you weren't careful, you risked being burned at the stake. So if today you step outside with neat hair, well-hydrated skin, a gentle blush, and someone says, "You look lovely," simply smile. Then softly reply, "It must be because I slept well." Trust me, medieval noblewomen would applaud you from the pages of history. If you've ever sat in a gym, drenched in sweat, listening to a trainer bark 10 more reps, and wondered why you're paying to be tortured, then let me take you to an easier age. An age where muscles weren't a symbol of health, but a mildly suspicious sign. Yes, welcome to the Middle Ages, where the ideal female figure didn't come from dumbbells, treadmills, or squat racks, but from poetry, perfume, and a touch of dress tailoring strategy. The ideal silhouette for a noblewoman then was slender, supple, and artfully delicate, not thinned like a matchstick, but ethereal, as if you'd stepped out of an unfinished sonnet. Light as morning mist, gentle as an underbaked loaf of bread. Each step need not be sturdy, only to appear as if a stronger breeze might send you fainting. And to support that look, fashion was the ultimate weapon. Gowns were cut with the waistline drawn high under the bust, not for spinal support, but to create the illusion of endlessly long legs. The skirt trailed heavy, flowing like a river of history, concealing nearly the entire body, yet highlighting what everyone wanted to see, the waist. That waist was cinched with ribbons, silken sashes, or expertly crafted belts, tightened enough to elicit gasps, but not so much that you'd pass out during the midday service. A beautiful waist wasn't the smallest. It was one that evoked refinement, as if you'd just set aside a love letter, your hand still scented with violet ink, and breakfast had been a single fig and 2 sips of pure water. However, don't misunderstand. Being too gaunt was also a problem. Medieval beauty required a subtle balance between ethereal thinness and the ability to survive winter. A hint of roundness at the cheeks, the shoulders, or the hips was considered healthy. It signaled that you not only knew how to compose verse, but also how to eat your meals. You might be fragile in a downpour, but you would not starve should the crops fail. Women of just right proportions, not too slender, not too plump, were the models in religious icons and classical paintings. You wouldn't find a baby cradled in muscular arms in church frescoes. But neither would you see someone so thin they needed a crutch. The ideal was to appear as if you'd never heard of dieting, because you simply didn't know what diet meant. Food in those days wasn't Instagrammed, nor was it a choice between keto or plant-based. It was a choice between is there any bread and who's got turnips today? And even in scarcity, dining was judged as part of your virtue. Eating in moderation, slowly, without shoveling it in or dropping your spoon, these all contributed to making you worthy of your noble appearance. Interestingly, women were not encouraged to be overly active. A lady running, chasing, or gardening with dirt-stained hands was hardly poetic. Instead, you were expected to appear with light footsteps, fingers interlaced, eyes half closed as if pondering a melancholic verse. Running about? No. Strolling through a rose garden under moonlight? Exactly. Even your posture in sitting was calculated to flatter your form. You did not squat, nor did you recline as if watching a play. You sat upright, head tilted ever so slightly, hands neatly folded on your lap, or perhaps lifted ever so gently to hold an imaginary teacup. Remember, tea had not yet arrived. All of this sent the message, I am delicate, yet not useless. I am fragile, yet full of dignity. However, here's the twist. Though you had to look slender and graceful, if you fainted too often, you were deemed dramatic. Once or twice, they might pity you. But if rumors in the village spread that you collapsed at every turn, they'd begin to suspect you were seeking attention. And a medieval lady never needed attention. People had to pay her notice of their own accord, in silent respect. Therefore, you had to master the art of feigned frailty, as if you could faint at any moment, but never did. Every blink had to carry a hint of fatigue, yet never reveal true exhaustion. If you're sitting there now, wearing an oversized hoodie, mindlessly snacking, and thinking about that workout you skipped yesterday, then congratulations. You have officially failed medieval beauty standards, but that's perfectly fine. Because in a world where you once had to pretend to be fragile to earn respect, being yourself, strong and free, is the luxury of this century. And if you still want to try living like a medieval noblewoman, perhaps start by standing up very slowly, lifting your chin just so, and whispering to yourself, "I'm tired from living on emotions and candlelight." Of course, you'll burst into laughter immediately afterward, and that is the sure sign that you were never meant to live on perfume and poetry. You were born to eat well, sleep soundly, and never need a cinched waist to prove your worth. And finally, after all the gleaming foreheads, the vanished brows, the breeze-kissed blush, the sunlit golden tresses, the towering hats, and the silk-cinched waists, we arrive at the close of all aesthetics, yet the beginning of every gaze, the eyes. In the Middle Ages, eyes were not merely for seeing. They were a proclamation, a silent melody, a quiet poem lingering after a long, drawn-out prayer service. Beautiful eyes needed no mascara, no flattering filter. They only needed to be large, clear, tinged with sorrow, and brimming with the power to make onlookers feel guilty for living so mundanely. The ideal, then, was a pair of eyes so wide and luminescent, as though newly blessed by a prayer for humanity, and touched by a hint of reverie, as if you just concluded a sacred hymn about parting and eternity. Not the fierce cat eye, nor the steely gaze of a war commander. No, the perfect medieval eye declared, "I am sad, but my sadness is gentle, like a leaf falling upon a still pond." Of course, few were born with the gaze of one awoken from a divine dream. Hence, women of that era had their own tricks. Not a palette of 16 matte browns, but pitch-black charcoal powder. Yes, charcoal, gathered from burning wood, crushed to a fine dust, then applied to the lash line with a fingertip or small stick. The aim was not a cat eye, it was to lend depth to the gaze. A depth that, when you looked in the mirror, made you think, perhaps I was once an exiled saint. This was the art of applying as if you applied nothing. A touch of charcoal made the eyes more solemn, more luminous, and, in theory, sent the hearts of spearmen outside the hall, skipping a beat. Of course, assuming they weren't blinded by dust. Beyond charcoal, another favored, albeit odd, method was standing beside a candle. Indeed, in a world without LEDs or ring lights, candlelight was the one true director of illumination. And women knew it. They stood near a flame, not so close as to singe their hair, but close enough that the flickering light reflected in their pupils, creating a shimmer, as though they were on the verge of tears. This effect was jokingly called the soulful gaze, an eye that could say, "I miss someone," when in truth you only missed the barley cake at afternoon tea. A few perceptive women even mastered their breath beside the candle. Inhale slowly, eyes just slightly open, a gentle tilt of the head, Everything to ensure the flame's dance glinted perfectly in the dark iris, leaving onlookers thinking she must have wept for the world's sorrows. Yet the pinnacle of eye artistry, the sharpest weapon, was a hint of tears. Yes, you heard correctly. Beautiful eyes were not wholly dry. A whispered moisture, just as though you'd finished reading a poem about winter's last orchard, would make every heart flutter. Naturally, not real sobbing. True tears would redden the nose, swell the lids, spoil the effect. Rather, the faint welling of emotion, like a single teardrop paused before falling. Some women were so skillful they could redden their eyes at just the right moment by yawning conspicuously, or by rubbing their lids when no one was looking. Then, when they turned back, their gaze would say, "I do not wish to cry, but humanity is so sorrowful." And just like that, you've transformed your eyes into a living work of art. No words needed, no smile required. Simply stare into the distance and let your eyes do the rest. Of course, maintaining that luminous-eyed look all day was no easy feat. Some tried dabbing water onto their lashes with a damp cloth, but the effect was fleeting. Others applied essential oils around their eyes, but sometimes the sting made them appear not sorrowful, but allergic to pollen. Those eyes were not just windows to the soul. They were a silent performance by a woman in a world that forbade her to speak aloud. And since she could not speak much, her eyes became everything. They had to convey what her lips could not, that she was clever, that she was kind, that she had once seen a double rainbow and never forgotten it, or at the very least, that she was thinking about the almond cake in the kitchen, though she would not mention it, for that would not be saintly. So, would you care to stand by a candle for a moment? Not to light the room, but to illuminate your gaze. Just remember not to stand too close. Eyes aglow are splendid, but singed lashes are not the medieval look anyone desired. After eyes that gleam as though you've just stepped out of a mournful hymn, you might think your medieval lady look is complete? Not quite, for there is one more, an intimate yet crucial detail, a small element that can entirely reshape a first impression. Your breath. Yes, your breath. Not something you often dwell on, unless someone turns away right after your good morning. Today, you have mint candies, silver mint mouthwash, dental floss, and ads promising fresh breath for 12 hours. But in the Middle Ages, pleasant breath was the product of a series of handcrafted, somewhat daring, and undeniably improvised rituals. Imagine you are a noblewoman preparing for a gathering in the great hall. Your gown is impeccable, your eyes sparkle beneath candlelight, your hennin towers above your head, and now it's time to chew parsley. That's right, a small sprig of parsley, not as a garnish for the meat platter, but tucked into your mouth, to be slowly masticated as though contemplating a sacred chant. parsley was believed to cleanse the breath, and made you look as if you loved nature so much you carried the entire garden to the feast. If parsley wasn't potent enough, you moved on to cloves, a tiny, stone-hard spice, yet fragrant and mildly numbing to the tongue, creating the sensation of using a form of mouthwash, 14th century style. The fashionable lady kept a few cloves in a little cloth pouch, nibbling lightly when needed. It was her way of saying, "I may not know how to spell mouthwash, but I have standards." However, if you wanted to go further, cosmetically rather than socially, you might try vinegar. Yes, the same you use for pickling. Some folks of that era used diluted vinegar as a mouth rinse, firmly believing that its sharp acidity would annihilate any unpleasantness lurking in the oral cavity. The side effect? You might look as though you'd just bitten into a lemon, but perhaps you'd also jolt your companions, wide awake. And a toothbrush? Oh, forget about it. No one had such a tool then. Instead, a piece of clean cloth was the standard implement. You'd wrap it around your fingertip, dip it in water, or, if you were feeling extravagant, in diluted wine, and wipe your teeth as if polishing an antique silver chalice. Slowly, deliberately, all the while praying that this would suffice, for there was no dentist appointment waiting to reveal your error. But no matter how hard you strive for pleasant breath, remember that a full smile, finally revealing your teeth, is a rare luxury. Not because everyone was dour, but because in that age, a discreet smile was the height of refinement. A gentle parting of the lips? Acceptable. A soft, eye-only smile? Splendid. But a broad grin, flashing pearly whites, or otherwise? Oh no. That was deemed ostentatious, even somewhat improper. An ideal lady would smile as though she just heard a kind word, yet still without full assent. That smile wasn't meant to seduce, nor to flirt. It expressed gentle gratitude, a kind of "thank you, but I retain my own opinion." In the paintings of the day, you'd rarely find a woman smiling ear to ear. Their faces were serene, lips lightly closed, eyes soft, as though they smiled only in their minds, sparing their mouths the trouble. For when you were never certain your teeth were properly cleaned, it was best to keep your smile to yourself. There was also a practical reason. Teeth in those days, truth be told, weren't the prettiest facial feature. Power lines, braces, cosmetic dentistry, none existed. And those with broken, stained, or missing teeth couldn't fix them with a photo app. Thus, the best way to preserve an impression of grace was to let no one see your teeth. So, when you meet a gentleman at a banquet and wish to leave a delicate impression, offer a light smile, tilt your head slightly, and, if needed, chew the last clove in your pouch. In doing so, you maintain aristocratic poise and ensure that no one turns away for reasons of taste. Would you like to try it? Maybe chew parsley before ordering, or stand before a mirror, swabbing your teeth with a damp cloth as if preparing for battle? Probably not, because in 2025, you have toothpaste, dental floss, mint candies, and most importantly, the freedom to smile broadly. No one judges you for a wide grin. Quite the opposite. They'll ask, "What's got you so happy? Share it with me." And so you realize, sometimes progress isn't about technology. It's about being able to breathe deeply, laugh heartily, and not need vinegar to feel clean. If you think all the beauty pressure in the Middle Ages fell solely on women, think again, gracefully, of course. For even before the invention of moisturizer or gyms, men of that era still had to look good. Not the hulking marine type, but the lithe poet gazing out the window in a gentle rain sort of look. The male beauty ideal then stood in stark contrast to today's six-pack abs. You did not need to lift stones, hoist weights, or do push-ups in a stable. What you needed was a tall, slender frame with a touch of contemplative air, a silhouette as if you'd just returned from a philosophical debate or penned a ballad for a princess you've never met. The ideal man wasn't a muscle-bound warrior, but an elegant knight, stepping lightly on cold stone, eyes cast to the horizon, one hand casually tucked inside his sleeve, a subtle sign that you harbor mysteries, but with exquisite composure. To complete that image, one detail was indispensable: the chin. Not a superhero cleft, but a sharp, elongated chin, carved from marble that seemed wistful and fond of poetry. A well-shaped chin could earn you notice at a grand feast, or at least catch the eye of a portrait painter. Yet that chin's charm would fall flat without properly groomed hair and beard. And now, let us enter the world of hair. Medieval men favored long locks, not rock star lengths, but purposeful lengths, smooth, sleek, parted with care, as if each strand understood its noble mission. That hair needed daily combing with a wooden comb, tangles teased apart as though deciphering a love letter, and, when possible, a touch of herbal oil added to gleam like moonlight on an autumn river. As for beards, if you wore one, it had to be trim. No scraggly growth reminiscent of 3 days sleeping in a hunting lodge. The ideal beard was neatly edged, perhaps pointed at the chin, just enough to suggest you were dangerous, but in a romantic way. And so, we come to attire, where every gentleman of the time truly exercised his creativity. Forget bulky tunics. Medieval men, especially nobles and anyone eager for attention in the great hall, wore hose. Yes, skin-tight hose, the kind that showcased long legs, or legs cleverly tailored to appear long, paired with a doublet, snug at the torso, puffed sleeves, buttoned, adorned with bows, and sometimes trimmed in lace. an ensemble that left you wondering whether the gentleman was off to battle or to a masquerade ball. A feathered hat or a velvet cap edged in silk served as the final flourish, perched atop your head, tilted just so, as though you planned to recite poetry but remained ready to draw your sword if needed. The hat was more than an accessory. It was a statement of character, broad enough to cast shadow over your gaze, yet not so large as to obscure that noble brow. Your walk required careful consideration, not too brisk, risking a reputation for impatience, not too slow, risking seeming feeble, but paced so that your doublet's tails swayed gently, allowing onlookers to admire your attire while you feigned indifference. Of course, your gaze was indispensable. A medieval gentleman's eyes shouldn't be too piercing, but certainly deep, as if pondering the realm's destiny, or recalling last year's sunset at the Abbey, when birds flew over the chapel roof, and you felt the world's impermanence. Do you think you could pull off the long-haired look? Picture yourself by a window, holding a goblet of wine, hair flowing to your shoulders, beard neatly trimmed, doublet snug to your frame, candlelight catching your cheekbones. You need say nothing. Simply stand, and everyone will know. Here stands a man of depth, of style, clearly having spent 45 minutes combing his hair before stepping out. If that sounds exhausting, fear not. Today, you can opt for hoodies, sneakers, a shaved head, or bedhead, and still be considered cool. Yet imagine, in a bygone century, masculine beauty as a masterfully orchestrated strategy. So if you feel relief at not having to don hose and feathered hats each morning, thank fashion's evolution. You're free from carrying an arsenal of combs and mirrors just to be elegant enough to sit beside a princess. After perfecting your long hair, stroking that sculpted chin, slipping into a snug doublet, cinching your waist, sparkling by candlelight, and offering a discreet smile as though blessed in a dream, there remained one detail, small yet profoundly aromatic. Body odor. Yes, indeed. No matter how beautiful you were, no matter how luminous your eyes, no one wanted to stand by you too long if you emitted fragrance at the wrong time, in the wrong place. But don't rush to judge. This was no era of lavender-scented shower gel, 48-hour antiperspirants, or dehumidifiers. In fact, bathing, a routine you consider normal each morning, was rather rare. Partly due to cold weather, partly because water systems were not always cooperative, and partly because people truly believed that frequent washing opened the pores and invited disease inside. Sounds sensible, doesn't it? Perfectly so, if you were a medieval physician with credentials from the Holy Scriptures. So instead of daily dousing, people chose to manage odor through ingenuity. Enter the pomander, a small scented sphere, your circular savior. A pomander was neither edible nor glowing, yet it wielded the power to freshen any confined space. Inside that palm-sized orb lay a blend of herbs, dried flowers, fragrant woods, and occasionally resin, mixed like a 14th century solid perfume. Then it was placed within a perforated metal ball, like an orange on a chain, able to diffuse its aromatic energy. You wore it around your neck, hung it from your belt, or discreetly carried it when entering a crowded room. If you passed someone and they inhaled gently instead of holding their breath, then you knew the pomander had done its job. Beyond pomanders, there were fragrance-infused gloves, a breakthrough invention, both fashionable and deodorizing. Soft leather or woven fabric gloves were soaked in aromatic solutions of orange blossom, cinnamon, or rose oil. When you greeted someone and they pressed their gloved hand to their lips in a kiss, you could witness their pleasant surprise, or at least avoid a grimace. And if you were truly discerning, you wouldn't stop at your hands. You'd treat your underarms, your back, and especially your shoes. Because shoes back then weren't exactly breathable. Imagine stuffing your foot into a slightly damp toast. Slipping flower petals inside your footwear was a rather poetic solution. Lavender blooms, rose petals, or dried chamomile were tucked into the shoe lining, both to impart a pleasant scent and to make you feel as if you were walking across a meadow, at least until you stepped in a horse droppings at the market. Some even lined their garments with a layer of linen to absorb sweat instead of their skin. This removable, washable, and replaceable linen layer meant you didn't have to launder your full-length, double-lined velvet robe. Linen, in modern terms, was the original undershirt, and likely the most coveted item among those who want everyone to smell themselves. Interestingly, fragrance then was not only to mask real odors, but also a marker of status. A person smelling of herbs proved they had the time, money, and connections to source exotic ingredients, while someone naturally scented was often assumed to be a peasant, a criminal, or at least someone who had never worn a silver pomander. Do you think you could get away with wearing a pomander to work? Picture yourself stepping into the office, the orb swaying with each stride, exuding notes of rosemary and cinnamon. Co-workers turning to ask, "Who brought the entire soap shop in here?" And you simply smile. "Oh, that's me. It's just the scent of the age." Of course, when you compare today's fine mist perfumes to a silver ball of dried flowers, the choice seems clear. Yet it's fascinating to realize that even without showers, shampoos, or moisturizers, medieval people still thought about scent and waged their own fragrant battles. And so, amid layers of heavy gowns, towering hats, restrained smiles, and sorrowful gazes, there remained someone quietly tucking lavender into her shoes, hoping that if she could not astonish others with her beauty, she would at least prevent them from fleeing her presence. After gliding past Europe's gleaming foreheads, discreet smiles, and pomanders nestled in flowing gowns, it's time to change course. Leaving Western castles behind, You step into the blazing sunlight of ancient Persia. There, before you, stands a majestic army, in straight ranks, silent, their armor gleaming like polished mirrors. Not knights, not gladiators, but those known by a legendary name, the Immortals, the undying of the Persian Empire. You heard correctly, undying. Not the drape-clad vampires of Gothic tales, but 10,000 men who could appear at once, and always number 10,000. Whenever one fell, was wounded, retired, or simply too weary to fight, another stepped in instantly. No soul outside the core knew who had been replaced. The formation remained flawless, as if they truly could not die. A masterful feat of psychological warfare, and a haunting specter to their foes. Imagine it. You're a weary Greek warrior, sweat pouring like rain, certain you've felled a Persian soldier. You sigh with relief. Then you look up, and the fallen fighter is gone, replaced by an identical man, standing unmoving in the same spot, not blinking. You begin to wonder, wait, am I seeing things? The truth is, the Immortals were not only powerful, they were beautiful. Not in the sense of dimples or flirtatious grins, but in a uniform, resplendent style, a strictly tactical aesthetic. They were chosen from the Empire's noblest, wealthiest classes, those with time to train in arms, the means to purchase gleaming scale armor, and the patience to march without faltering. Each wore metal scales that glittered under the sun, a mobile mirror reflecting the enemy's hopelessness. They carried spear, bow, dagger, not for show, but to exact the Empire's precise standards. Their formation moved as if pre-programmed. No speech, no misstep in marching. Each man stepped forward like a cog in a giant machine, oiled with discipline. You watch and wonder, how did they train like this? The answer lies in their destiny. They were not volunteers. They were born for this purpose. An Immortal was more than a soldier. They were a symbol. Their presence spoke volumes. The Empire watches you, and the Empire will not perish. They needed no words, only their steady march. And strangely, that was more persuasive than any speech. They did not dress in gaudy red cloaks like Hollywood warriors, yet a gold-adorned cap, supple leather boots, and sometimes embroidered patterns on their tunics were enough to make them both fearsome and fashion-forward. Each looked as though stepped from the stone reliefs at Persepolis, where every fold and curve adheres to a perfection almost unbelievable, even the drapery of their garments. And then, if you're considering joining this army, ask yourself a few questions. Are you willing to keep your lips sealed in formation for 6 hours straight? For speaking is betrayal of the line. Can you endure heavy armor in 40-degree heat? No air conditioning, no fizzy water, only discipline. Can you stand in perfect alignment, an exact copy of the man before you? If not, you will shatter the illusion of immortality. And breaking that illusion is like pulling the plug on the entire system. People will see you are merely human. Each immortal must ensure he does not stand out. It may sound counterintuitive, but in a symbolic army, uniformity is the mark of success. No one remembers each individual face, because the goal is to make the enemy think they are all the same and they will never run out. That is tactical immortality, not biological. You might carry a pomander, wear a fitted doublet, or even tuck a flower petal in your shoe. But if you want to stand in the immortals' ranks, you must become part of the power machine, unyielding, precise, yet majestic. And if you, just if, are thinking, I could give it a try, then remember, you cannot fix your hair in the line. You cannot gasp for air when marching. And you absolutely cannot sneeze, unless all 9,999 of your comrades sneeze in unison. So, do you wish to join the immortals? Or will you sit quietly on your couch, gaze toward ancient Persia, and murmur with a wry smile, I prefer being immortal from home, watching Netflix instead? Some women enter history through gilded portraits, smiling gently by a hearth. And then there is Boudica, who burst onto the scene like a whirlwind, blowing the Roman Empire's map to shreds, trailing smoke, chariots, and an anger with no off switch. She did not sit weaving cloth. She did not recite poetry under moonlight. She led a rebellion that slaughtered tens of thousands of Romans and razed cities once hailed as beacons of civilization. A reaction perhaps a touch extreme, but if you too had lands seized by Rome, endured public humiliation, and witnessed your daughters violated, you might also abandon bakehouse duties for a spear's heft. Boudica was the queen of the Iceni, a Celtic tribe in Britannia, modern-day England. At first, she meant no harm. Her husband had died. She only wished to preserve her daughter's inheritance. But Rome did not play by local customs. They declared, all these lands now belong to the empire, and acted as though none had ever met a woman called Boudica. They ought to have asked first. The initial insult was the flogging of their queen and the rape of her two daughters, a practice in so-called civilizing that is absent from any decent etiquette book. That was when Boudica decided, if words cannot defend, let fire do the talking. And so, not a mere few dozen, but tens of thousands of tribal warriors gathered under the banner of revolt. They donned no polished armor. They studied no Greek philosophy. They carried clubs, spears, axes, and a red-haired queen on her chariot, furious as a thunder god. Their first target, Colchester, a confident Roman stronghold. Next came Londinium, today's London, a bustling, civilized metropolis. Naturally, Boudica visited first. She did not simply attack, she incinerated. Cities burned, Roman forces were shredded, settlers fled in terror. Some historians record over 70,000 lives lost to Boudica's raids, a figure that would make any governor literally drop his goblet of wine. Her army seemed chaotic to the Romans, but to those who had lived under subjugation, who had been exploited, and forced to accept a Roman world they never asked for, it was organized fury. Of course, such fiery revolts could not last forever. Rome struck back and rammed home everything it did best: formations, discipline, and tactics impossible to execute if you were riding a chariot without a map. Boudica lost the final battle, not because she was weak, but because she could not stand against an empire with an endless supply line. And like many legendary female warriors, she chose to end her own story. Not to be captured, not to become a laughingstock in the arena, and certainly not to let the Romans decide how she would be remembered. Today, you can spot a statue of Boudica near Westminster Bridge, regal atop her war chariot, facing Parliament, where Britain's politicians still gather, debate, and wear not a shred of armor. That statue is not a praise of violence, but a memorial to someone who refused to be silent. And you, have you ever wanted to rebel? Not necessarily wield a spear, but at least dare to say no when you witness injustice? Dare to step out of your comfort zone, even if no one applauds. Dare to stand up without an army at your back. Boudica had no military training, no PR advisors, no social media account to rally #Justice for Iceni. She had righteous anger at the right moment, and an unshakable belief that justice needs no ruler's permission. If you hesitate, fearing you're just one small person, remember, Boudica began alone. Then she became a nightmare that kept an infamous empire awake at night. You need not burn London, but if tomorrow you see wrong, don't simply tap your keyboard. Shrug on your resolve, lift your chin, and ask yourself, what would Boudica do in this situation? You may choose silence, that's fine. But if you choose action, no matter how small, you are mounting your own war chariot. And with that, you may not become immortal, but you will certainly be remembered. You think the ancient world was all sword-wielding men and fan-waving women? Think again, and watch your fingers, for the blade you just heard of might belong to Tomoe Gozen, the legendary 12th century Japanese female samurai, or to an Agoji warrior who sent the French army into retreat, and into retreat again. No embroidered scarves, no afternoon tea. 2 women, separated by thousands of miles and many centuries, yet united by one thing. They shattered gender stereotypes like watermelons under war horses. We begin with Tomoe Gozen, a name that sounds like a haiku muse, but in truth, this muse knew how to cleave enemies in two. Born in the Heian period, when samurai were real fighters, not mere manga characters, Tomoe refused to sit and embroider. She stood beside Lord Minamoto, no Yoshinaka, serving him while leading troops into battle. Tomoe did not merely accompany, she commanded. She rode horseback, shot the bow, wielded the sword, and excelled at turning arrogant men into cautionary tales for future generations. Records tell of her single-handedly toppling a towering samurai, dragging him from his steed, hurling him to the ground, and dispatching him with a swift beheading. Graceful, swift, with no need for souvenir photographs. She was never labeled female warrior as if an oddity. She was simply samurai, because she was one. And while society fretted over whether women should learn martial arts, Tomoe had already fought 3 battles and ridden home before anyone could object. Next, we shift scenes. Farewell to the land of cherry blossoms. Welcome to Dahomey, a West African kingdom where you'd expect dancing, drums, and festivals, and you'd find them. But you'd also find the Agoji, an all-female army famed for iron discipline and the ability to shatter enemy ranks like biscuits in hot tea. The Agoji wore no cloth caps, no billowing gowns. They were trained from girlhood, climbing trees, practicing knife combat on dummies, and later on real foes. They lived in their own barracks, did not marry, did not bear children, because they were wed to battle. A commitment with no holidays. They were not mere women soldiers. They were the king's special forces. Need a show of power? The king paraded the Agoji. Need to quell unrest? He sent the Agoji to the front lines. When the French colonists attempted to seize territory, they learned one lesson: never underestimate a woman with a blade just because she wears a bracelet. Accounts tell that in clashes with the French, the Agoji charged fearlessly through gunfire, wielding machetes, direct, devastatingly effective. The French called them a waking nightmare. But nightmares are born when you think you're dreaming by day, only to be jolted awake. Compared to Tomo, the Agoji were more organized, more numerous, and far more ferocious. They neither rode horses nor shot arrows. They ran on foot, wielded knives, and did so with the calm assurance of those who know they are not just fighting a battle, but rewriting history with every strike. Neither Tomoe nor the Agoji needed anyone's permission. They did not wait for social acceptance. They had no hashtag movement or PR campaign. They only required a sword, an enemy, and a justified reason to rise. The question is, who do you want to be? Tomoe, her hair flying in the wind, fighting on the frozen battlefields of feudal Japan, under moonlight and amid the thunder of hooves, or the Agoji, their eyes blazing, standing beneath the African sun, in formations forged like steel, needing no words, only deeds. Neither choice is for the faint of heart. You cannot carry a pomander into battle. You cannot adjust your hair while wielding a machete, and you certainly cannot ask, "Is there a latrine nearby?" Yet there is one thing both inspire: the power to shatter the boundaries set by others, not through declarations, but through action, not with noise, but with a presence that reverberates. You may never lift a sword, but when you find yourself trapped by others' expectations, remember Tomoe. And when you must enter a boardroom full of skeptics doubting your ferocity to lead, remember the agoji. For history is not only written by men astride horses, it is also carved by the blades of women who step forward, uninvited, and shape their own destiny. After Tomoe Gozen and the agoji, you might think the saga of female warriors has ended? Not at all. If history is a stage, this is the final act where the spotlight falls on figures you would never dare call strong women, because that label still sounds understated. Here, you meet women who did more than live through history. They stamped their power onto its face. Let us begin with Kutulun, the 13th century Mongol princess. The name evokes moonlit horseback rides and soft ballads at dusk, right? But no, Kutulun needed no songs. She threw opponents to the ground in wrestling matches, then rode off before you could grasp what had happened. As Genghis Khan's granddaughter, Kutulun had no interest in playing proper princess. She issued a curious challenge. Any man wishing to marry her must defeat her in wrestling. The loser would forfeit 100 horses. The result? No one ever married her, and she amassed 10,000 horses, an accumulating collection of suitors' failures, or as she called it, dating standards. Whether she loved anyone remains uncertain, but she certainly loved victory. Now, leave the frozen steppes and meet another heroine, Joan of Arc, the French peasant girl said to have heard voices from God and utterly unwilling to stay silent. At 17, she led the French army to lift the siege of Orléans, clad in armor, astride a horse, hair cut short as if fresh from a classic rock video. She was more than a spiritual emblem. She was the commanding general. And by some miracle, or sheer stubbornness, the troops followed her orders without question. Their triumph had France cheering and the clergy somewhat unsettled. For you know, women in armor. Hearing divine voices and winning battles was not an easy image for robed elders to digest. She was captured, tried, and ultimately burned at the stake at age 19. A verdict steeped in justice if you supported medieval courts. But to the world at large, Joan became a saint, not for her martyrdom, but for daring to stand, don armor, and lead, at a time when women weren't even freely allowed to read. And if you need further proof that women did not merely dream by the hearth, meet Nakano Takeko, the last of the female samurai in 19th century Japan. When the Meiji government began modernizing by discarding all things old, Nakano refused to relinquish one thing: her katana and her loyalty. Though regulations forbade her combat, she disregarded them. She formed a detachment of women fighters, tied white cloth around their heads, and charged into battle until she fell to gunfire. Before she died, she asked her sister to behead her to prevent her enemy from seizing her body. A rather severe dinner table request, yet entirely fitting for her creed: never yield. And if you think that's ancient history, allow me to introduce Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the Ukrainian sharpshooter of the Soviet Union in World War II, with 309 confirmed kills. Yes, 309. Not an SAT score, but the ledger of lives she dispatched with her sniper rifle from the trenches in the biting winter cold. Lyudmila did not ask for headlines, yet the headlines followed. Invited to the United States to rally support for the war. She was asked questions very feminine, such as, "Which foundation do you use?" She didn't answer. Instead, she spoke into the microphone. "I am not here to discuss cosmetics. I am here because the enemy is out there, and I have killed 309 of them." A reply that drew applause across the room and silenced several reporters mid-pen stroke. No one dared ask the color of her lipstick again. From the Mongolian steppes to the battlefields of France, the fortresses of Japan, to the frozen fronts of Ukraine, these women asked no one's permission to do something great. They rewrote history with action, not background. Do you want to do the same? No sword needed, no gun required, only the will to stand tall, to step forward, and to say, "I am here too." You may not wrestle horses for a bride price. You may not command troops at Orléans. But you can, every day, refuse to bow to prejudice, remain silent in the face of injustice, or shrug off what is wrong. And thus, even without a statue, you are adding a line to the book of history. You need no name engraved, only footprints left behind, just as they did, in silence, in storm, and in the fire. As the lights of those tales, warriors, beauties, and towering hennin hats fade away, you suddenly hear an unfamiliar sound. Not a blaring alarm clock, nor the background hum of TV. Rather, something far more ancient, the music of our ancestors. No, they didn't stream tracks from Spotify. Our forebears needed no AirPods. They possessed far stranger and more profound instruments, both decorative and seemingly capable of summoning the divine. First, the lyre of Mesopotamia, resembling a miniature harp after a collision with a shoelace. Ancient Sumerians sat by the Tigris and Euphrates, plucking each string as if whispering to the gods. One melody might not save the harvest, but at least it made the prayer session less monotonous. Then came the Greek aulos, a double-reeded flute that you blow into through both pipes at once, a tool as much a lungs challenge as a social statement. The Greeks believed the aulos connected mortals to Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and all questionable decisions after 11 p.m. Mastery of the aulos was akin to controlling every party provided you didn't faint from oxygen deprivation mid-tune. Eastward, in ancient China, there was another melody, the guqin, unadorned, unobtrusive. The guqin sported 7 strings, no raised frets, its tone echoing from distant mountains. It was an instrument for the contemplative, or for those feigning contemplation to avoid answering letters. Chinese scholars sat by their guqin, pouring tea, stroking their beards, if they had them, and plucking notes as though conversing with Confucius over a spiritual Bluetooth link. Meanwhile, in Africa, drums spoke a language all their own. Yes, drums were not mere dance beats. In many communities, drums functioned as communication devices, a form of cultural messaging. Tonight there's a festival. The neighboring village needs a cooking pot. Or simply, it's mealtime. Drums did more than resound. They connected, bridging distances, transcending boundaries between people or between mortals and the divine. Next, you hear the Andean pan flute soaring on high, the pan flute. Gentle as a breeze, its melody conjures mist-shrouded peaks, where a shepherd plays tunes not for humans, but for sheep with discerning musical tastes. The Andean flute never shouts, never blares. It whispers, like an embrace from nature itself, accompanied by a soft reminder. Relax, breathe. And then, Aztec drums. Not the ordinary boom-boom you know. Aztec drums resonated like the earth's own murmur, beating like the heart of the jungle. They were not played for amusement. They summoned gods, intimidated foes, or announced that a ritual was underway and demanded your utmost seriousness. Their rhythm reminded you are part of something far greater, something transcending even your forgotten bank password. Ancient music required no amplifier, no stage with blinking LED lights. It was as natural as breath, as innate as a heartbeat, as subtle as rustling leaves, and it never fades. You might sit in your modern room, air conditioning humming, LED screen glowing, yet somewhere, in the silence, the music of our ancestors still echoes. Not for entertainment, but for connection. You may never learn the guqin, lack the lungs for the aulos, or own enough sheep to appreciate an Andean pan flute. But try listening, for ancient music does not reside in notes alone. It lives in the moment when you pause and let your mind drift. And as you slowly close your eyes, you might hear the guqin whispering from afar, the flute's melody drifting around the room, and somewhere the drums of our forebears sounding, not to awaken you, but to lull you into a peaceful slumber. No sleeping pills, no sleep aid apps, just a touch of imagination. Because if our ancestors left us anything, beyond quirky traditions and genes, it was music. And in those ancient rhythms, perhaps we rediscover what we have long forgotten: stillness, connection, and a sleep undisturbed by phone notifications. Can you hear it? That is the Guqin's whisper, saying, "Sleep now." And so you have survived a strange odyssey, a journey spanning millennia, without hiking boots or sunscreen. From the misty castles of the Middle Ages to the blazing battlefields where warrior women defied entire empires, from secret smiles tucked beneath layers of linen to ancient sounds echoing like the heartbeat of our ancestors, you have seen, you have heard, and, quite possibly, imagined far more than any doctor would prescribe at bedtime. You sat beside Tomo Gozen as she drew her sword, her gaze icier than unsweetened iced tea. You stole a glance at Joan of Arc as she rode through the streets, even as English soldiers reeled at being commanded by a French girl, and obeyed. You shook your head in amused disbelief at the medieval lady tucking lavender into her shoes, just to prevent fainting from the smell. And who could forget the moment you pictured yourself by candlelight, eyes shimmering only to nearly singe your hair, or the moment you tilted your head, curious if you were slim enough to wear a high-waist gown, yet not so thin as to be mistaken for plague-stricken. Throughout this voyage, you witnessed something no history book ever teaches: that beauty, courage, power, and even body odor are redefined across the centuries, with a satirical flourish only history can deliver without facing a lawsuit. You laughed softly at tales of pomanders and perfumed gloves. Yes, when everyone strove to give off fragrance without shampoo. You found yourself wondering about Persia's immortals, not because you fancied joining them, but because you wondered if they ever got time off. And you surrendered to the rhythm of Aztec drums and Andean flutes, not to dance, but to be lulled to sleep by echoes ancient as the cosmos. All of that may sound bizarre, absurd, sometimes completely irrational, but that is precisely history. Not just numbers, dates, or lengthy royal names that bore you into slumber, but human stories, vivid, strange, and fundamentally human. Fears, desires, absurdities, and those moments defying logic, reminding you that your ancestors were just as bewildered as you when you forgot your Wi-Fi password. And now, after surviving all that, with your heart still beating, your chest free from a corset squeeze, and your hair unsinged by candle flames, you may finally let yourself relax. Close your eyes. Imagine lying on a clean straw mattress in a peaceful monastery. No Wi-Fi, no Zoom calls, only the gentle song of birds outside your wooden window. Or perhaps you're stretching out on the Mongolian steppe, a breeze teasing your shoulders, with an eagle perched nearby, not for a selfie, but to guard your dreams. Or maybe you're inside the tent of an immortal army, the pan flute's melody drifting in from afar, uncertain whether it's music or an invitation to a fairy tale slumber. Wherever you are, within your imagination or under a warm blanket, remember, you have just learned history, and you are still awake. A little. That, in itself, is a victory. And if this strange journey has made you smile, let out a surprised, "Oh," or simply helped you forget about your electricity bills for a while, consider that a small triumph. Not every night demands an adventure, but a dream accompanied by Aztec drums, discreet smiles, and shimmering eyes isn't such a bad way to drift off. If you've enjoyed these odd yet real tales, feel free to hit like, share with a friend who also loves history lullabies, and subscribe so you won't miss the next episode of History Before Bedtime. And finally, sleep well. Let the warriors, the noble women, and the orchestras of our ancestors stand watch over your dreams tonight. And if you find yourself riding beside Boudica or playing pan flute among the Andes, don't worry. You're simply traveling through history once more. See you in the next historical dream, where anything is possible, and the scents are far more pleasant than in the Middle Ages. Good night.